Hello, I'm Diane, and I haven't been reading very much this year. I have been reading, but only like one or two books a month, really. And recently I've started reading more. I've just been focusing my time and energy on other things. I've had a lot of other projects going on this year that I just haven't really had the time or the energy to just sit down with a book or a bunch of books like I normally would. However, I have been finishing some books, so I want to talk about what I've been reading over the last few months. I think, updated in the beginning of July, maybe, about what I read in the first half of the year. So today I'm going to talk about what I've read in the last 3 months since that update. I did also DNF a couple books. I think we'll start there and then move into the things that I actually finished because I prefer to end on a more positive note than the books that I didn't end up liking. I have two books that I DNF'd. The first one was The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. I don't even remember when I started reading this book, but it was probably like 2 years ago. And I think I got like a third of the way through. I think the world is really interesting. I did like most of the characters. I liked the magic, although I don't really think I understood it at all. I don't think I got far enough to really understand the whole scope of the world and the way everything was interconnected. There was just a lot going on, but it also felt like it was moving pretty slowly. So when I finally picked it back up, I've picked it up a couple times since I first set it down. I just wasn't that invested in what was going on. It was a little too slow moving for what I was in the mood for. So I might go back to this at some point. I hear very good things about it. I didn't dislike it. I just wasn't very engaged in it when I picked it back up. So this one may come back around eventually in the future, but for now, I don't really have any plans to continue reading it. And sort of similarly, I also set down The Darkness Before Them by Matthew Ward. This is the first book in the Soulfire saga, and I was really excited about this and was really interested in the very opening of the book, but this was one of those cases where there's a lot going on in the world, and there's a lot of really unfamiliar things and terms and a bunch of characters showing up, and I just kind of felt like the more that was explained, the more of this world we got to see, the less I felt like I understood what was going on. I felt like there was just a lot of terminology and name dropping that didn't really mean anything to me, and I just wasn't invested enough in the main character or the main plot to carry on and piece it all together. I've read a few books like that where I just feel like we get dumped into a world that is very different, and the little bits that were being given weren't really fleshing out the world. They were just making it more confusing for me. I just wasn't getting on with the way that it was written and the way the world was being developed, so I ended up DNFing it. I could go back to this in the future. I'm not really planning to. I'm more likely to go back to The Mask of Mirrors than The Darkness Before Them. This one, writing style just really wasn't working for me, is the main problem. Now let's talk about the books that I did finish. I did like all of these. Most of these are sequels, so I'm not going to talk too much about plot because I don't want to spoil anything, but I did really enjoy these. I finished up a lot of series that I've been loving that I didn't really want to end, but they did, because that's just what happens. The first book, which is not a sequel, is The Full Moon Coffee Shop by Mai Mochizuki, and this actually does have a sequel coming out. I don't know if it's a direct sequel or just a very similar story that's coming out in either November or December. Anyway, this is about a magical coffee shop that is run by talking cats, which is very weird, and it only appears when people need it. So we follow three characters who their stories are all intertwined. there is a connection between each of them, but they all come across this coffee shop one at a time. I think it's very interesting. I didn't dislike it, but I don't really think I was the audience for this, mostly because I didn't connect specifically with anything that the three characters were dealing with. So I think if you could relate to whatever at least one of those characters was going through, this would probably be a better book. But I just wasn't really invested in their problems, and there's also just a lot of like astrology based advice that the cats give, which is fine, but it's not something I'm really one to put a lot of stock into. So, pretty good book. Nothing I'm really going to be widely recommending, honestly. It's not the type of book I would normally be reading. The next book I finished was The Memory of the Ogisi by Moses Osiotomi. This is the third and final book in the Forever Desert trilogy, which is a trilogy of novellas. Each story takes place in the Forever Desert, which is a desert that has civilizations in it, but they're all very widely spread out and very separate from one another. They're not like interacting and trading. They're very wary of one another. Each of the books take place many, many years apart, so they do kind of hold up on their own, but they are definitely tied together. What happens in the first book is heavily referenced in the second book, and this book kind of ties everything together of how this desert came to be the way that it is. I really loved this series. I think it's very well written. I'm not a big reader of short stories or novellas. I think that they're a very, especially in fantasy, a difficult length to really pack a well-developed world in and compelling characters, and for me to feel like I got a complete story, because I really like worlds with a lot of history and I like large casts of characters. So the short stories and novellas don't always appeal to me, but I feel like these did a very good job of feeling like I got a really full story in a really well-developed world with well fleshed out characters, and they going through their journey with them and seeing the things that they learn about the world and themselves, I found very compelling. So I really enjoyed this trilogy and I definitely recommend it. I think it's a very interesting story and very well written. The next book I read is Level Ascension by David Dalglish. This is the sequel to Level Unknown, which is a lit RPG series. If you don't know what that is, basically it's a fantasy series where there is experience points being gained and skills being developed in a quantified way where you actually get to know what level, as if they're in a video game, the main character is. This is the first and still only lit RPG I've ever read, so I have no point of reference how this holds up within that subgenre. I'm really liking this series and this world. We do follow multiple characters and get different points of views in this, which I don't think is typical in lit RPG. I think you would normally only follow the one main character and their leveling, but in this we get to learn about our other characters, which I really like. I like getting multiple points of view. And I liked this sequel because we've kind of already established, for the most part, how the world works, and at least to some extent what the world even is, because our main character travels in and out of it. There is his real world and then this virtual world that he enters. So I think the third book is supposed to come out by the end of this year, I believe, and I am looking forward to seeing where things are going and what's going to happen to our characters in this world. The next book I finished is The Sword Triumphant by Gareth Hanrahan. This is the third and final book in the Lands of the Firstborn trilogy. This book I struggled to finish, not because I wasn't enjoying it. I really love this series. It has a lot of fantasy elements that I personally really love. This is a very big world. We get to see quite a bit of it. There is a ton of history. A lot of time passes throughout this story, mostly between the second and third book. There is quite a time jump. And we follow some heroes who thought they were done being heroes and get called back for one last thing to save the world from one more bad thing coming that is not just one more quick quest. It turns into a very long adventure that we finally wrap up in this book. I loved all of the characters. There are a lot of characters to keep track of in this book, but we only follow a few perspectives, so it's not too jumping around from point of views. And I had a hard time getting through this because I just didn't want it to be over, which is kind of a rare thing for me. I don't really get stuck in worlds where I'm like, I don't want this to end, but I was a little worried about what was going to happen to our characters. No one was really safe in this story, and I just didn't want anything bad to happen to them. But I'm really glad I finished it. I really loved it. I definitely recommend this if you like those types of fantasy stories that cover a lot of ground, have a lot of adventure. There is a magical talking sword, and I really love the relationship between our main character and the sword throughout the series. I think it's very funny is not really the word. Some of their interactions and disagreements are a bit comical, but I think it's really interesting the way that their characters develop and their relationship develops as things go on. Highly, highly recommend this series. And the final book that I finished was Echo of Worlds by M.R. Carey. This is the second and final book in the Pandemonium duology. This is a story about an AI developing in the multiverse. We see many versions of Earth. In the first book, we follow 3 characters and see how they get together. And then in this second book, we now have a group rather than following characters one at a time who are all working together. There is now a war erupting between all of the living organic beings of the multiverse, whatever the ruling species became. Not every version of Earth has humans as the dominant species. Some of them are rabbits or cats or other creatures that ended up evolving instead of humans, and also the robots and other machines that now have this like AI hive mind basically. And they're really at odds with one another, these organic beings and the machines. And our main cast of characters are trying to find a way to stop the war, or at least end it before everyone is wiped out. I really enjoyed this duology. I think I enjoyed the first book more, but the second book was still very interesting to see what everything was leading up to. They're definitely 2 halves of a whole. I mean, it's a duology, but the stories are definitely work best together rather than as individual installments, but I really enjoyed this. So not a huge quantity of reads, but pretty good quality over the last 3 months for me. Even my DNFs weren't really bad books that I hated. They just weren't really what I was looking for at the time. And everything that I finished, I really enjoyed. So hopefully it won't be another 3 months before I have enough books to really bother talking about. I am still trying to get back into reading every day, or at least most days. But I'm also still doing a lot of other things beside reading. So let me know what you've been reading the last few months, whether or not you've been reading a lot this year, or just reading a bit here and there like I have. Let me know what books you've read that you've really loved in recent months. I would love to hear about that. Otherwise, that's all for me today. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time. Bye.